I'd very much like to, I'd be delighted to welcome Jess Gillham to join me. Thank you, Jess. Jess from Macmillan. So Jess is the strategic marketing planner for Macmillan, and she's also the lead for the Reimagine Task Force. But I'm not going to steal any more of Jess's thunder. She's going to talk to you about how Macmillan has taken a really collaborative approach to redesigning their strategy and objectives. Thanks very much, Jess. Over to you very much, Jess.
Brilliant. Okay, so yes, thank you for having me here today. It's a real privilege to join you all. So as Richard said, my name is Jess. I'm currently the head of strategic marketing planning at Macmillan, but I'm actually here to talk to you today about how we're developing our new organisational strategy and how we're taking a collaborative and inclusive approach to set a new vision for the future of Macmillan. And specifically, what I'm going to share with you is how we're approaching this. So I'm going to introduce you to this thing called open strategy. Some of you will have heard of it, I'm sure. Some of you might have done it and experience of it yourselves. But I'm going to cover off what it is, why we're working this way, and how we're going about it. And then I'll hone in and talk about one of the open strategy task forces that I recently led, what we were asked to do, how we worked in a brand new way to collaborate and to think differently about the future of Macmillan. And as Richard said, we do have a little bit of time at the end for questions as well. Without further ado, though, I'll skip on to what open strategy is all about. Well, in a nutshell, open strategy is a very different way to develop strategy. It's not your typical top-down approach where strategy is set by C-suite senior leaders. It's a strategy that is open, it's inclusive, it's collaborative, and ultimately is a way to generate ideas that allow for transparency and for inclusion. And really, at its very, very heart, open strategy is about bringing new and challenging voices in and making processes and decisions much more visible. And in terms of why Macmillan have chosen to take this approach, well, I think really, I'm sure everyone on this virtual Zoom knows only too well that the world around us is changing. And in our sector in particular, we need to respond to these challenges and opportunities in the best possible way. And ultimately, it's absolutely critical that we create a vision for Macmillan that is shaped by the people and the communities that we serve. So open strategy as an approach is not about creating a business as usual strategy. It's a process that enables organisations to transform and to disrupt. And we know that as part of that, it's critical that we involve people affected by cancer at every stage of the strategy process, as well as our supporters and other voices outside of Macmillan. So that usual top-down, written in a dark room approach to strategy simply won't cut it. To have the greatest impact on people affected by cancer, we also need to give everyone in the organisation the opportunity to participate in some way. So that means working differently. And for us at Macmillan, that means working in agile, which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with as well. And what that means for us is that employees at Macmillan help to shape the direction and focus. And there are many, many ways for people who work for Macmillan to get involved. So that's from being part of a open strategy squad to a task force, or we have these things called strategy safaris as well. So lots of different options for people working within the organisation to take part, to then critically feel that they have a stake in what we're developing together because we're doing it together. And perhaps another really important part at the heart of open strategy and the approach overall is the mindset that we know it won't be perfect, but it will be a good start. And I think that in itself is a very liberating mindset to go into strategy development with. And it really unclips and encourages diversity of thought because it doesn't need to be perfect. That's quite a liberating piece. Okay, so that's a bit of a nutshell introduction to open strategy overall. And we started our journey on open strategy with three very big strategic questions. I had the great privilege of leading a very talented bunch of people in a task force to answer one of those big strategic questions. And that question essentially was to reimagine Macmillan. So a genuine, almost, I would suggest, once in a career opportunity to start an organisation from a blank sheet of paper. So that precise question that we were given was this, which hopefully you can all see on screen, which is when Douglas Macmillan, our founder, first founded Macmillan in 1911, he started with a vision for betterness for people with cancer. And our key question was therefore, if you reimagined Macmillan to be in a position to have the greatest impact over the next decade, what kind of organisation would we be and what would we do to have the most impact? So that was the question itself. And then the sections around the outside of that question was the extra additional steer that we were given on top of that. And those things were almost more helpful than the question itself, or just as helpful as the question itself, because we were also given this steer as a team that we did not need to be constrained by what exists now, that this wasn't about making Macmillan a better, faster version of what it already is. It was about nothing being off the table. And perhaps most kind of excitingly of all, if we don't make people gulp with the work that we do, we're not doing it right. So a really, really incredible question to be faced with. Although I do know I speak for everyone on the task force when I say that we were pretty terrified, a lot of healthy fear at the very beginning of all of this piece of work. The question's enormous, highly daunting. And we were one of the teams to go first, if you like, in answering some of these big chunky questions. So it was a little bit like jumping out of a plane and not really having a parachute or knowing where you were going to land. So very much in the territory of feel the fear and do it anyway. Nonetheless, as I say, once in a career opportunity really to start an organisation from a blank sheet of paper. So how did we do it? Where did we start? Well, I thought it would be most fitting to introduce you to the task force itself to begin with. So this is us. This was the Reimagine Macmillan task force. We came from all over the organisation, and I think that's a really important point. So we had team members from the Learning and Development team, UK partnerships. We had members from equity, diversity and inclusion teams, our corporate partnership team, innovation, marketing, direct services. We had never worked with each other before, and we actually didn't even meet in real life until the final few weeks of this project, which is partly why this team picture looks like we're sat in some weird cinema type thing, because obviously it was taken virtually. So coming from those different parts of the organisation meant, of course, that we all brought completely different skills, completely different experiences, different ways of working, different things that gave us energy, different things that drained us. And it's precisely that diversity that's been a huge asset, especially for a question as big as Reimagine Macmillan, because it means we're obviously coming at things from completely different places. And that's exactly what the organisation wanted from us, is diversity of thought. But obviously really critical to setting ourselves up for success was the need to get to know each other. And I mean, really get to know each other, not in a tokenistic way, not in a way that this is a short-term piece of work and we'll get to know each other for 5 minutes and then move on. It was essential for collaboration and also inclusion that we got to know each other enough for everybody to feel they could be themselves on the task force. And a key part of that was that need to build psychological safe spaces within the team really quickly, because I'm sure most of you know already, but if your brains feel safe, your brains relax, and that's when you can really think differently, really think innovatively, creatively, collaboratively. So spending time, investing time on really getting to know each other was a really important part. We also ditched the job titles. So the job titles that we held in our day jobs, we left completely behind. That was very intentional. There was no hierarchy within the task force team. And actually later on, one of the task force members, we were talking casually about other things, and they commented on how they'd felt quite daunted at the outset because they knew that they were the most junior part of the team. But as a result of the way that we structured ourselves and built that psychologically safe space, they never felt like the most junior person in the room. And that for me was a really heartening bit of feedback to hear. Another really important element to mention is that we were all 100% of our time on this task force. So we left our day jobs behind while we answered this big chunky question. And I think that mattered because it bonded us as a team even further, because we were all there to work on one big thing. There were no distractions. We could give it our complete attention. And that forges a team, I think, in a slightly different way than when you're juggling 15 different projects at once. Finally, we also had an agile coach within the team. And that person, that role was there to provoke us, to stretch us, to challenge us, to get us to do our best work. But they were also there to reassure us when we wobbled. And we did. We absolutely wobbled. I certainly did several times as the lead of the task force, and have you not done it before, in the question, etc. So the wobbles were generally around, were we thinking big enough? Were we giving the organisation what they were asking for? Or were we even thinking too big? Was it too far out? And the agile coach was fantastic, not only because they helped us to stretch our ideas, but they also told us to trust the process and to trust ourselves. And that was all part of the psychological safety that was created within task force as well. So all of those things gave us a really strong, safe space, great foundations where we could trust each other. And obviously, trust, safe space is the absolute bedrock of collaboration, and it's where you see collaboration at its very best. I'm going to talk a little bit now about how we worked as a team. So we worked in Agile, and I'll go through what that looks like, how it felt, and why, again, I think it's such an important method for collaboration. So again, I'm sure some of you will have worked in Agile before, but if, like me, Agile is something you'd heard of but not done before, then essentially what Agile is all about is working in sprints. So we had 12 weeks in total to answer that big chunky question, to reimagine Macmillan, and those 12 weeks were broken down into 4 lots of 3-week sprints. So what that means is we would set a goal for every sprint. So we were only ever looking 3 weeks ahead at any one time. What do we want to achieve over the next 3 weeks? What do we want to achieve over the next 15 working days? And this gave us 2 things. Gave us pace, because we had to work quickly, and Macmillan traditionally is not very good at working quickly. So it gave us pace, it gave us energy, but also by breaking down the work like this, that really big, scary question that we were faced with at the start, that we were quite daunted by, all of a sudden felt less scary, much more manageable, because we chunked it up into those 3-week sprints. Another big part of Agile is this idea of making. So you're doing more making and less managing when you're working in Agile. And that meant we would, as a task force, create ideas and experiments together. And that word experiment is quite an important word in Agile. So we would create and experiment together. We would build on those ideas together, but we would also break them together. That was a really critical part of working in Agile. And then we would, of course, remake those ideas together. And part of that safe space meant that we could challenge each other in a really safe way, in a really compassionate candor. So we actively sought challenge and debate, because if we always agreed, then we knew we weren't doing it right. So at the start of the process, we had roles within the team, for example, like positive disruptor. We actually left those behind quite early doors. But the good thing about having roles within the team with the remit of a positive disruptor is that you knew that that's what you were there to do, and it was a welcome disruption, and it was done from a good place in order to push and challenge ourselves even more. Another really important component of working in Agile in this way is that when you showcase your work that you've done, so we would call these our share and build sessions, and that would be because what we would have been doing, we've been working in the open. So we would invite a group of people from across the organisation to come and hear what work we'd done so far. And this was not about us as a task force putting together polished PowerPoint presentations and recommendations. Very much the concept and mindset and point of Agile is that you show your workings out, and that what you're looking for from that group of people that you would share that workings out with is, are we on the right track? Are we headed in the right direction? Do we need to go in a different direction? Are there places and rocks we haven't looked under yet? That's what you're looking for. And a really important element of that is that you then avoid those big reveal failures at the end. And I'm sure we've all been involved in projects and programs where you work quietly in a room for months on end and then do the big reveal, and it's not actually what the organisation needs, or the requirements have moved on. None of that happens when you work in Agile, because you're constantly sharing what you're doing and iterating as you go along. So there is no big reveal at the end. It's much more iterative. And then the final component part of working in Agile is at the end of every 3-week sprint, we have what's called a retro, which is, as the name kind of implies, a chance to look back and think about what worked well, what worked less well, and what we need to change for the upcoming 3-week sprint. So all these things designed to drive us towards inclusivity, involving many voices from within and from outside of Macmillan, to avoid those big real failures at the end, but encouraged us to experiment and to test and to iterate as we went along. I wanted to sort of summarise from my perspective as well what worked so well for us, what felt good for us. And they feel like the key ingredients that made this work. Really, not to sound cheesy, but one of the best experiences of my career so far. And if I had to pick 6 key ingredients for success when approaching something similar, the things that worked for us were the fact that we were working on big questions, not projects. And that in itself, I think, is a really different way to operate, because there's something quite empowering about being given a question, quite liberating about being given a question, because there's obviously multiple ways to answer that question, whereas a project is quite narrow. You have a beginning, middle and an end, and you know what the outputs need to be. All of that sort of terminology is left to one side when it comes to working in Agile and working on a big question, and that is a really powerful mindset to have. Having that safe space, the ability to bring your whole self and be yourself in that task force was critical, so important, as was the need to leave the ego at home. And part of that, of course, is leaving the job titles that you have in your day job at the door, because they're not needed here. You're all working together collectively, and that for me is at the heart of collaboration, effective collaboration. I've also got on here this thing called yes energy, because this for me was a massively important part of why it felt good, why the work that we produced was well received, because we were all there because we wanted to be there. We'd all applied to be part of this task force. It was the question that we were all attracted to. Therefore, we brought all of our yes energy, we brought positivity, we brought positive challenge, and that really made a difference to just the day-to-day working. Another element was the freedom aspect, and really, really key that you embrace the freedom. And by that, I mean, leave behind what the organisation is doing right now, because we're not here to do better, faster. We're here to transform. We're here to disrupt. So embracing the fact that you don't have to worry about what's broken right now, because actually you're looking in parts of the night sky that you haven't looked in before, and being able to embrace that freedom really early on and let go of what you know to be true is a key ingredient, as is the final point on here, which is the idea that you build together and you don't detonate each other's ideas. There is no such thing as a bad idea, and I know we probably say that on a daily basis when we're all sat in workshops, etc. But there was a real sense of yes and to this piece of work, not that won't work. So I think those for me are the standout ingredients for success when approaching a strategy or a strategic piece of work that you want to be genuinely collaborative and inclusive. And I will leave you with the final slide, which is the word cloud that we put together when I asked the task force, probably about 2/3 of the way through the project or piece of work, how does it feel in 3 words? And you can see the 3 standouts on the screen in front of you in green are energizing, fun, freedom, and lots of words associated with those themes alongside it as well. So really hope that summarises how it felt.
We have got 2 questions, and actually I've got one of my own. But if it's okay with you, can we send those over to you afterwards, and we can share those with delegates afterwards? Is that okay?
Absolutely, please feel free. Yeah, and I'm really sorry I can't rejoin you for the panel part later on today. I have to go back to my other away day.
So I think the one word that stood out for me, I think, was gulp. I think that's just such a brilliant summary of this whole approach. It's like that bravery. That's the scale of it. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you taking time out from your Macmillan away day as well to come and speak with us. So thank you so much, Jess. Big thanks from
everybody. Absolute pleasure.
Here.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye, everybody.
Will do.